First of all, my name is Feng. I want to welcome everyone, literally from all corners of the world, for this very, very exciting fourth Dialogues on Asian Universities. We call it DAU4. Let me take this opportunity to say a few words of acknowledgement. The first one I have to admit, and I have to acknowledge, is King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia for its technical support during the last several months in making sure that everything goes right for today. So I want to thank KAUST, which is the university's name, and the technical people of this university. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues who's already online, Tony Chen, who is the president of KAUST, Tan Chai or Ing Chai Tan, president of National University of Singapore, and of course, last but not least, Max Liu of Bloomberg New Economy. I think that it is clear that today's dialogue is a collaborative effort for the four of us, without which it would not have happened. The dialogue for Asian universities came about when the four of us that I just mentioned realized that while Asia is rising quickly, I think higher education in Asia is rising even faster. And that recognition is not well understood in the West. And so that's why we wanted to set up this platform for this purpose. But before I introduce the panelists, I must take this opportunity to thank the participation of India's High Commissioner in Singapore, His Excellency P. Kumaran. For the audience who may not be aware what the title High Commissioner means, it is de facto India's ambassador in Singapore, a term which is used by the British Commonwealth, countries in the British Commonwealth sending high commissioners to each other. I, of course, also need to give special thanks to two particular individuals, Mr. Pradeep Gupta and Mr. Saran Narka, who literally were instrumental in introducing to us some of the panelists. So I want to thank them. Okay, so now let's begin with the opening comments of our panelists. I'll start with Professor Subra Suresh, who is the president of Nanyang Technological University. He went to Nanyang in 2018. He was the former president of Carnegie Mellon University. Subra is a biological engineer and material scientist. He joined NTU in 2018. Prior to that, he was the president of Carnegie Mellon, as I mentioned. He was also the director of the National Science Foundation for 2 years and the dean of School of Engineering at MIT. He obtained his bachelor's degree, or they call it BTech, from IIT Madras, and you'll see why that's important later on. MS from Iowa State and PhD from Mechanical Engineering at MIT. Subra, the floor is yours, or the screen is yours. Hello, Subra.
Yes. Thank you very much, Hsuan. Good morning or good evening, colleagues. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to join this panel to discuss some of the topics that are of global interest, but the focus today is going to be on higher education in India. And as Hsuan just introduced, my origins are from India, but I cannot claim to be an expert today on India because I've lived outside of India for 44 years. So what I would like to do, my lack of knowledge of the current situation in India will be more than compensated by three individuals who are eminently qualified to comment on this. But I'm going to take a few issues. Not all of this is any surprise to anybody, but these issues have been highlighted because of COVID during the course of the last 18 months or so. So I'll start with a list of topics that we will pick up during the course of this discussion of global interest, but with a particular focus on India. What COVID has shown us since the beginning of 2020 are the following. Many years of technological adoption have been compressed into a relatively small time span of only a few months. And it's not only acceleration of the adoption of technology, but very, very broad adoption of technology itself through digitization, and as a result, accelerating Industry 4.0 itself in very profound and significant ways. In the process of doing this, it has clearly blurred the delicate line between personal space and workspace, as all of us on the Zoom call can attest to. The second major trend that has emerged is the importance of universities to society. Whether it's development of vaccines, development of knowledge that contributes to the development and distribution of vaccines, or the underlying logistics and many other issues, manufacturing, etc., universities have demonstrably played a very important role on a global scale. The third lesson learned is the demonstration of the incredible ability of humans and organizations to adapt to and to adjust to situations in the face of crisis. And history has shown time and time again that people, and especially young people, are forced to face circumstances that are way beyond their control. As we saw during the 1918 pandemic, the World War I, World War II, etc., they emerge out of it with a level of resilience that is often lacking in generations that have not gone through that experience. So that is pretty remarkable about the situation. The fourth lesson that has come out of this is that science and technology have conclusively demonstrated their importance to society. All we need to do is to look at the speed at which vaccines are developed and also the unprecedented efficacy of these vaccines. So these are all very good things. They've also highlighted the academia, industry, government partnerships that have worked reasonably well in the development of vaccines, distributions of vaccines. At the same time, there has been major challenges and shortcomings we have learned which impact universities. Digitization and the pandemic have accelerated global connections. They've connected people across boundaries at a time when they could not physically meet. But unfortunately, that broadening of globalization has been accompanied by, because of the pandemic, travel restrictions, lockdowns, closed borders, and not to mention geopolitical tensions and trade tensions between major countries and so forth, which have reversed globalization. So on the one hand, universities have always been the bedrock of globalization, but the geopolitical factors have pulled us in the opposite direction. This is a challenge for all the universities. It's especially a challenge for a country like India, where we have gone from 70 or 80 universities at the time of, or 20 universities at the time of independence, only 75 years ago, to about 1,000 universities today. The pandemic has also exposed many inequalities and made them worse. inequalities between rich countries and poor countries, which is clearly reflected in the access to vaccination itself, inequality in access to digital tools, gender, race, and income inequality, and many other forms of inequality that we have seen around the world. In jobs, women disproportionately losing more jobs, even in developed countries, underrepresented minorities losing jobs, etc. While digitization and social media have expanded global connections and access to communication to individuals, they have also exacerbated trust in science, trust in established news media, lack of attention to evidence, and they have highlighted and in fact made worse things such as misinformation and fake news. So trust in science itself, at the time science has really delivered the results, is a little bit shaky at a time when we really need it. And universities are the places where basic scientific information often originates. The other factor is that 2.5 billion people, 2.5 billion people, that's the population of China and India combined almost, have been involuntarily confined to their homes over a very short period of a few weeks to few months last year. This is the largest, the first time in human history this has happened. During 1918, the world population was not even 2 billion. So this leads to a significant experiment, human experiment, in the implications of all of this in things like mental health and what happens after COVID and so forth. There was an article in Scientific American about this last year. The pandemic has also highlighted the importance of learning to live with uncertainty for all of us, especially for young people. That education of not deterministic learning, but probabilistic and uncertain learning will lead to a level of creativity in things like engineering design, which would be pretty remarkable. And it remains to be seen. The last point I want to make is that the World Economic Forum has created a number of global future councils, which are looking at aspects of this in the new normal. One of them is scientific collaborations. What role can universities play in all of this? So these are just a few factors that I thought would be useful for us to consider in the Indian context so that we can pick them up. These are global factors. But with respect to India, it's a large country. So in the next decade or so, it'll become the most populous country, a young population, a tremendous source of talent pool for the entire world, a very diverse population, a developing nation with large inequality even before the pandemic. So given all of this and the rapid rise of India as one of the economic powers, what implications do these factors have? And then I'll close with one topic that is of interest in our discussion, and that is the desire in India to open up universities to the global audience and global student and faculty cohorts. And what role do these factors play in that effort? So with that, let me stop at this point, and then we can pick it up during the course of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Subra. I think you have outlined very comprehensively the global issues challenging higher education in general and Indian universities in particular. What you have discussed is a perfect segue into our next speaker, which is Professor Suranjan Das. Professor Das is, or Suranjan, we're going to just call everyone by first name. Suranjan is a historian. He is not a science and technology guy, but he's a renowned scholar in South Asian studies. Since 2015, he became the Vice-Chancellor for Jadavpur University, a top state-level university in India. He is also the Honorary Director for the Netaji Institute for Asian Studies in Kolkata. From 2008 to 2015, he was the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Calcutta, or University of Kolkata, Professor Das received his bachelor's and master's from the University of Calcutta and his PhD from the University of Oxford. Professor Das, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, very well.
Well, could I first thank, say a very good thank you, a big thank you to Hsuan, Max, and his colleagues for giving me this unique opportunity to be present in this very prestigious panel. I was asked to speak about the development in Indian higher education since independence and to lay down the basic principles that have underlined the new education policy. In doing that, let me start with an emphatic assertion. The assertion is that compared to the countries which won independence almost at the same time that India did, or what we call in history the period of decolonization, the higher education system in India has attained remarkable progress. As Subra pointed out, in 1950, there were only 25 universities in India. Today, we have 1043 universities, more than 42,000 colleges, and about 11,779 stand-alone institutions. The total enrollment of higher education in India is 38.5 million. We have about 15 lakhs teachers engaged in higher education in India. We have about 50,000 foreign students, mostly from the neighboring South Asian states. Now, all these make India the second largest education system in the world after China. And we have made significant breakthroughs in science and technology. If you go to the United Kingdom, a majority of the doctors in the health service are from India. Silicon Valley, you have a huge domination of the Indian technocrats. In terms of the applications for drug patents, India is only second to the USA. India's pharmaceutical industry has won wide acclaim, and we have once again proved our worth during the pandemic by producing large number of vaccines. Breakthroughs have been attained in the realm of biotechnology, nanotechnology, and our space research program has also attained considerable breakthroughs. In terms of social science research, in terms of researches in humanities and literature, we have been able to provide an alternative discourse to the discourse that has so long been dominated by Western and neo-colonial elements. So there has been significant breakthrough in the realm of higher education in our country. Yet our system requires some systemic changes to make it more vibrant, to make it more relatively more efficient in terms of the global scenario. And as I see it, the higher education in India face 4 major challenges. And these I call the challenges of the 4 E's. The first E is the E of expansion. The second E is the E of excellence. The third E is the E of equity and access. And the fourth E is the E of employability. As I said, there have been tremendous expansion of higher education, but yet this expansion has not been in tune with the rising demands and aspirations of the society for higher education. Our gross enrollment ratio is roughly about 27%, far below the world average of 35%. So we need further expansion. But how do we expand? When we expand, we also should take into account the challenge of the equity and access. And here we have serious challenges. The challenge ranges from social challenge, class challenge, gender challenge, regional challenge. I give you some random examples. If we take the entire student population in higher education, only 14.7% are from scheduled castes. Only 5.6% are from the scheduled tribes. Only 5% from the Muslim community, and only 2% from the other minority groups. So there is a huge social constriction in terms of the equity. If we take the gender aspect, the female enrollment has not touched 50%. I was reading an article the other day where only 10% of the research scientists in national laboratories are females. About 33% of the total population, student population, is from the urban areas, only 14% from the rural areas. 2% of the students enrolled in higher education are only from the below poverty groups. There are also serious regional imbalances. 33% of the colleges are located in southern and western India, and only 3.5% of the educational institutions in the country are located in eastern and northeastern India. Even there's uneven enrollment in terms of discipline. It ranges from 37% to arts to 3.48% in medicine. And although we are a predominantly agricultural country, only 0.5% in agriculture. And despite a twofold rise in the teaching, in terms of the number of teachers, the student-teacher ratio is still very low compared to the world standards. It is 28:1. So there is also the other challenge. We have now the increasing participation of the private sector. About more than 50% of the students are now enrolled in the private sector. But that also raises the question of equity and access, because the students for the lower social segment find it very difficult to enter into the echelons of the private sector. Then this brings me to the question of excellence. I mean, despite our improvement in quality, there is not a single Indian university which has been able to get a slot in the first 100 universities of the world. Again, in terms of research publications, we fall far behind China. There is in terms of India's international contribution to patent registration, our ratio is only 0.3%. And I can leave a number of statistics to show that we also need to improve in excellence. In terms of employability, there is also a serious gap between the students coming out of the institutions and their ready employability. I refer to a recent survey of the Confederation of Indian Industries, which shows only 25% of the students coming out from the technological institutes are immediately employable. Now, to address these 4 E's, a number of commissions have been appointed by the Indian government, starting from the Radhakrishnan Commission 1948-49 to the new education policy of 2020. And I would say that the new education policy of 2020, which has come after 34 long years, so far as education policy is concerned, has made a significant paradigmatic shift in the realm of policy formulation in higher education. For example, I would say that it is a policy which is extremely student-centric. There's a lot of opportunities for the students in terms of mobility. There are special provisions for making higher education inclusive. There are also certain for policy formulations in terms of providing multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity in teaching learning process. But what is more important, there are also provisions for structural change. Now, Indian higher education has been traditionally based on the British system because of the colonial links. But now we find there is a shift towards the American pattern. For example, now there is a talk, instead of traditional 3 years of undergraduate, we should go in for 4 years of undergraduate. The system of affiliating universities, which is the predominant system that we borrowed from the British system, is now sought to be done away with. There have been a multiple number of regulatory bodies, but now all these regulatory bodies are to be brought under one umbrella. Like the American system, there is now the talk of the National Research Endowment Fund. So there are fundamental changes that are being envisaged. There is, for example, an attempt to categorize the universities. At the top, there will be research universities. Second, there will be research and teaching universities. And finally, there would be the autonomous colleges. And what is important is that in this education policy, there is a great stress on the autonomy of the institutions, which is a significant welcome route, but there are also certain pitfalls in that. The final recommendation that I would like to highlight upon, which would be quite important for the panel, is the stress on the internationalization of higher education. So far as India is concerned, the point that Subra made, but in terms of discussions, I'll come back. There are certain challenges that India have to confront if we want to make internationalization of higher education in India equitable and providing a free platter in terms of competition between the coming foreign universities and the Indian indigenous universities. So to conclude, I've just taken, I think my time is over. I conclude that yes, Indian higher education system has been enriched by continuous experiments. Yes, Indian higher education system is plagued by certain challenges, but we have also tried to confront those challenges. And I refer to the last important document that has been prepared by the government of India to meet these challenges. In terms of discussions, I can come back to some of the policy formulations that have been made in the new education policy and the difficulties that might come in implementing those policies. But the new education policy has opened up a new opportunity whereby the challenges inherent in the Indian education system can be met. And I believe that if we can meet those challenges, the Indian higher education scenario will be further enriched, diversified, and also make it more interdisciplinary and make it more compatible and more challengeable to the world education scenario as such. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Das, Professor Das. As a historian, you have clearly outlined some of the education challenges that India higher education is facing at the moment. The next speaker we have is Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthi, who is the director of IIT Madras. Bhaskar is an electrical engineer specializing in communications and signal processing. Since 2011, he has been serving as the director, or de facto, as I said, the president of IIT Madras. Under his leadership, IIT Madras has been ranked as the top engineering institution in India for 5 consecutive years in 2016 to 2020. He himself, just like our first speaker, received his bachelor's degree or BTech from IIT Madras, but his MS and PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Bhaskar, the screen is yours. Hello.
Bhaskar, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I had muted myself just to prevent echoes. I'll repeat myself. Greetings to everybody. Greetings to Hsuan, Max, Lou, and everybody. Thank you very much for hosting this wonderful event. I also want to say that I'll share a few slides. We were encouraged to put our thoughts down on slides. I did that. So just give me a few seconds. I'll just put up my slides, and that will also help keep me disciplined. So I'm going to focus, as I was asked to do, on technical education in India, which is a big part of the Indian higher education system. Though probably numbers, I think number of students enrolled in arts and science colleges is probably much higher, but aspirationally, a lot of students in India want to take up technical education. Yeah. So where do we stand? I think this has already been mentioned. There's a healthy number of high quality research-based technical universities. The IITs, of course, have made a name for themselves, but quite a few others. And there's been good growth of these, and the government has set up many more of these. A lot of money has actually been disproportionately, one could even argue, gone into these institutions. And they're all public institutions for the most part, though there are some good private universities also. And there are clear goals of breaking into the top 100. As Professor Suranjan Das mentioned, this is one of the aims of the university institutions themselves and of the government of India. There are a huge number of largely undergraduate teaching colleges. This was also alluded to by Professor Das. These colleges, technical colleges, are the mainstay of the IT industry, which, as you know, is probably the largest Indian industry visible globally. In fact, there's an oversupply of these colleges with varying quality. Because of the huge demand from the IT industry, colleges were opened. These are all private colleges. They're opened all left and right. Until recently, this oversupply was till several years ago was okay. But then the jobs were harder to come by. And now a rationalization is in progress. Many colleges which are not that good are shutting down. And the market forces are taking care of this to an extent. The new education policy 2020, very succinctly explained by Professor Das, lays down stretch goals. It lays down a general enrollment, wants to achieve a gross enrollment ratio of 50% by 2035 from 27%. This is, of course, across all higher education, but India is engineering crazy, as I said, and so engineering has to also increase its gross enrollment ratio quite a bit. One of the highlights of the new policy is that they want multiple entry and exit points for the students. It's student-centric, as was explained, with academic credit portability. So students should be able to exit with certificates, diplomas, degrees, re-enter, upgrade from a diploma to a degree, and so on and so forth at multiple institutions. There's also great emphasis on reskilling opportunities. In other words, when you exit with a lower degree, then you work for some time, you come back, you want to reskill yourself. There's a great emphasis on multidisciplinarity and on flexibility. Now, normally, these do not go hand in hand with the cookie cutter degree production lines of the kind that these largely UG teaching colleges have put in place. So there has to be a paradigmatic shift in how many established institutions have to approach higher education in engineering. Employment. This was also alluded to. The economy will grow from $3 trillion roughly now to about 10 trillion. In today's dollar value, it may be, I think the exchange rate will also change, so the numbers may be a little lower, but in the next 9 years, plus minus 1 or 2, I'm not an economist, you can argue about this, but it's going to get there. And that you can do your own numbers on what that will mean in terms of the demand for higher education and the ability of many students to pay. The IT industry has transitioned very quickly in the last 2 years, 3 years to digital. With agility. In fact, there were a lot of doomsday predictions that it will not do so and will lose out, but actually has done this very well. And the growth projections for the IT industry over the next few years are actually staggering. And so I think the employment potential of the IT industry is only going to get bigger. The Indian manufacturing has begun stirring, but manufacturing 4.0 is an entirely new animal. The good news, it's driven largely by digital, IT, data science. So it sort of plays into strengths in which the country has developed. The bad news is it's less amenable to absorbing large numbers of cookie cutter graduate trainees. In other words, once again, this business of producing hundreds of thousands of engineers, do the same courses, study the same exams, write the same, do the same thing and say the same things at the interview. This is not going to work. So that's the bad news. The other interesting phenomenon is a startup frenzy. So everybody, knew India is going to have startups, but really it's been quite a frenzy, and there's an unexpected growth in startups. It's unpredictable employment potential at the moment. On the upside, it could be significant, even comparable to the IT industry, not necessarily in numbers, but in terms of growth rates. Almost sure it's going to absorb at least as much as the traditional manufacturing industry has absorbed all these years. So startups are going to be an important employer also. Now, the delivery of higher education, technical education, the pandemic has accelerated. People are talking about this all the time, saying, yeah, we should do it, we should look at it, but, it won't work and so on. But now everybody is very clear. It's never going to go back to what it was.
That's right.
It's fully online now, but it's going to go back to probably some hybrid physical plus online, so-called digital. Even for skill-based diplomas, welding and so on, people used to think, oh, you have to do this hands-on, but actually we have discovered you can do 80% of it using simulators and emulators, and you can just, you need hands-on, of course, but you can really scale up the capacity by a few times by adopting technology. Live online education as well as MOOCs for reskilling definitely is already now getting to be a proven tool. Live online, what I mean is classrooms held online, but these are live classes. Online undergraduate programs for select disciplines with great employment potential, such as data science. IIT Madras itself is running a big experiment on this. We've just launched last year undergraduate program in data science and programming. The graduates that will come out of this must be comparable to those from brick and mortar institutes. And that is our challenge. If we are able to show that this can be done, and in fact, our aim is to do better, then I think the new game's on. And large-scale internship-driven UG programs. Internships are, again, some things that people think don't scale well. But once again, a lot of companies have got used to the idea of virtual internships in the last 1 year. And to some extent, they work. And so, again, companies and colleges are going to have to look at a combination of virtual and physical internships, hybrid versions, and so on. And really, industry, especially the kind of manufacturing 4.0 and other industries that are coming up need a lot more internship-driven education. Now coming to the role of foreign universities. So online course delivery is already happening. A lot of students in India are taking courses online from universities abroad. it's a good low-cost alternative. The new education policy encourages setting up of brick and mortar elite universities in India. XYZ university campus in India and so on. You can choose XYZ from the top 50 or 200 anywhere in the world. But the cost of education can be prohibitive. And the high-end market can always be addressed. India, as everybody knows, even as people who sell Rolex watches in India know, Apple phones in India know, the high-end market of India, even if it's a small percentage, can be larger than the absolute market size in most countries. So there's always a market for this, but I'm not going to address this part. Student loans in India as a solution to the cost problem are a difficult proposition. And the reason for this is loans in India are a difficult proposition. Interest rates are too high. You'll just have to look at the interest rate at which the government borrows to know what I talk about. So, if you have to take a loan and it collects interest over 5 years, 6 years, it just becomes too much of a burden. So student loans, even if at the end of the day, the student's going to come up with a fantastic job, are not a model suitable to India, at least at scale. The NEP, I'm going to come back to all of this once more in the next slide, and then we can discuss it later. The NEP proposes to set up a national research fund. This was also alluded to, which they claim will also fund private institutions. Now in India, till now, the government's research funding, which is not too small, especially given India's wealth, economic level, has always gone mostly to the public institutions. And it is to be seen whether this big change will be actually implemented, because it's been articulated by the visionary people who are foreseeing where education should head to. I'm not sure the auditors have signed up to this. So this could be crucial, because if you want to set up elite research universities in the private sector, then they must have access to research funding from the government. And if this is not opened up, I don't see how elite research universities can be set up in India by anybody other than the government. Foreign universities also, I believe, have to innovate to operate in India, partly because of some of the points I made in the previous slide, especially regarding cost. There's a huge demand for high quality UG education. As of course, people quote about the large numbers of students going from India abroad and say that, well, they would pay at least half that amount to study in India, but actually they probably won't, because one of the reasons they go abroad and pay a large amount is they know they can pay back the loan very quickly because of the huge income levels, because they can work in those countries. So, the cost of education in India has to be substantially lower. And so does one always need a research university to do that? The model from many countries is you set up a large research university and you also do a high quality undergraduate education there. Can faculty come and go from a research university elsewhere? And, sort of imagine a model where your college is attached to that university and you do the teaching here, faculty come and go. You can use your imagination to figure out various options. Can hybrid teaching models be deployed with short visits, 4 to 6 weeks, 2-3 times a year by high quality faculty, aided by well-trained tutors who are located here, as well as some online teaching? Can students spend 3 to 4 months once in their entire program at the foreign university for an immersive experience? Can the cost of all this work out reasonably well? Maybe they can do this after they have a job through their placement, so that they know they can, even if they have to take a small loan for this, they can repay it quickly. Can the total cost of education be carefully curated while yet offering hitherto unavailable quality in these private institutions? Can foreign universities address some of their own financial challenges, especially after the pandemic, using these kinds of innovative approaches? Instead of the usual 500 million, not 5,000 million, 250 to 500 million big ticket offshore investment model driven university, creation, followed by huge fees. And, you can always address a small elite market with that, but can some other scalable models be evolved? These are the questions that I want to leave people with. We can discuss a little bit more depending on how it goes later in this program. But for now, I'd leave you with these questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was one point that you raised that piqued my interest, and that is the fact that the federal government, or whatever you call it in India, would not fund private universities. This is, of course, totally different from the United States and many other countries. especially in the United States, as when I was the program manager in theoretical physics in National Science Foundation, we of course treat proposals coming in from places like Harvard and Yale's very, very carefully and very, very seriously. And the fact that India, at least up to now, does not fund private universities is an interesting mindset change if that can happen. Well,
I should give a small caveat. They do fund, but very modest
okay.
amounts today.
Okay.
This is, but saying that they would treat them the way they do it in the US, is what they're saying now. That is a paradigm change. Okay.
Of course, very good. Another issue that was raised somewhere between the last three speakers, I don't remember who spoke about. In Silicon Valley, there is a joke about Silicon Valley, and that is, of course, Silicon Valley is known for integrated circuits or ICs, but people also call that Indians and Chinese. Anyway, that's a joke. The next speaker is Professor Roy. He is a statistician and a cryptologist. In 2019, he was appointed as the chairman of the National Statistical Commission, an autonomous government body to help statistical agencies across India. Prior to NSC, or the National Statistical Commission, he was the director for ISI, the Indian Statistical Institute, a very, very distinguished institution in India. Professor Roy received his bachelor's and master's degree from ISI and his PhD from the University of Waterloo. Professor Roy, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Hsuan, and thanks to Max also. And good evening, good morning to the participants. Since I deal with statistics more these days, let me start with some numbers, some government statistics, and then I will get into my actual topic. So in India, we have tried to restrict our population growth to less than 1%. Well, this is an objective for us. And if you look at the numbers, these numbers are important. It's not irrelevant for my talk also. So in 2018, we had our estimated population, or we have census only once in 10 years, but we do estimate the population. So in 2018, the estimated population was about 1.319 billion, which rose to 1.333 billion in 2019, and which rose to 1.347 in 2020. We still don't have the estimate for 2021. So if you look at this data, we have been more or less able to keep the population growth within 1% limit. But then we have to look in the education part. Okay, first let me go to the worker part. Now, if you look into the working class in India, the number of workers in India in all sectors altogether, in 2018, it was 458 million, which rose to 471 in 19 and 515 in 20. So the number of workers have rose much above than 1%. So I would say this is about 7-8%. So more people are coming out for work, and especially true for the women. So they are coming to work. They are joining the working class. Now, if we look into how many people are educated. So in India, the notion of higher education is if you have a college degree. So if you have an undergraduate degree or above, we call you that you have attained a higher education. The number of this higher education people in the working class, this was 52 million in 2018, 57 million in 2019, 63 million in 2020. And in this year, it's something like 70 million, my rough estimate. So there has been a growth in higher educated people in the working class by almost by more than 10% growth. Now, if you look at this number, that in 19 we had 57 million higher educated people to 63 in 2020. There's a gap of 6 million. That means we have added 6 million higher educated people in the working class, which was 7 million in last year. Now, if I look into the data given by Suranjan, that how many were educating. So our enrollment at this point of time is about 38 million. And if I look into last 4 years data, we have been producing graduates and above between 8 to 9 million. Now there is a problem for the government as a policymaker. So the working class, we need about 6 to 7 million, the way the economy is progressing, but we are producing 8 to 9 million higher educated persons. So that's a potential problem for the government, how to handle this one. So by imparting higher education, are we generating unemployed people? Okay, then I come to that data by the CII, Confederation of Indian Industries. They have said that only about 25% of the graduates coming out of the Indian colleges are employable. So this is, I don't have any government report on that, but there is a notion that yes, the education is not producing the people who could be fit for the job in the industries in the upcoming days. And by and large, these people who are getting educated, they're mostly from the social science, humanities, and science domain. And I will just focus my rest of my talk on the education of science and mathematics. If I go back to 1947, when we became independent, our then Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he took a socialist way of societal development. So education was supposed to be the responsibility of the state. So all the government institutions, okay, were virtually free. When I studied in my college, it was virtually free. I didn't pay any tuition fee. And I think there was a thought that for science and mathematics, well, there will be usual colleges and universities which will produce graduates, postgraduates, PhDs. But in order to be at par with the international development, international community, institutes are created. So okay, I call it elite institution. We bred elitism, but I think some excellence and eminence was also a target. So the government had created many institutions which are specially meant for master's and PhD level program in science and mathematics. And if I mention a few numbers, it's surprising. Department of Atomic Energy of Government of India, they promote research in mathematics and theoretical physics. And they had created 7 institutions across India. If you think of the other government agencies like Department of Science and Technology, okay, Council, the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, these are government departments, but they have actually initiated many instances of this higher learning. So I think each DST and CSIR has probably produced about 20 to 24 such institutions, which are producing people of higher education with research output. Now, these institutions are supposed to produce scientists which would be at par with the international level, and that we have tried to keep up. But what happened in the meantime, they're producing such a huge number of institutions. I would probably count over 60 or 70. They're hardly producing 5,000 to 7,000 such mathematicians or scientists in the country, okay, which are the top grade. And there is no problem with employment to these people. The problem employment comes into the people who are coming out of this college, and the quality is remarkably different. And since government has taken a decision at that point of time that education will be basically supported by the government, the cost is kept at low, except technical education. So the science and social science, all educations are basically free. Now, unless you put more investment from the government or for some private body, these colleges which are given degrees in science and mathematics, they are not going to produce the quality that the employers are looking for. At this point of time, if I see the investment in education by the government and for the basic colleges, it didn't grow up much. And they are not really even increasing the number too much at this point of time. Investment has been very limited. So I'm not expecting a real high quality change in the college education, and people are coming out with this mathematics and science degrees. And there we need what I say foreign investment to produce quality these things. And the foreign investments should compete with institutes like say TIFR or ISI or IISc and these basic institutions. For they do huge investment. And as Bhaskar already told, government is rather reluctant to invest money on these private institutions. So now this is a policy matter we discuss in the government, and what is the solution? So and we do need to produce more qualified people having degrees in science and mathematics, and the current system just doesn't produce. Okay, we have these elite institutions which do produce, but I think my understanding, I don't have the exact migration data, more than half of them leave the country. They will probably go to US, Canada or Europe. So the elite people that we are producing, the quality researcher and educationist in the science and math domain, we lose at least half of them. Okay, and then the Indian industry or the employers suffer. So the big challenge for this education is now people have to come up as a private party from India, from abroad, and then they have to set up these institutions which will develop mathematics and science and come to the level these elite institutions are, and then they will be more employable, and the kind of economical growth we are thinking of, and we can meet them. Okay, probably I'll stop here, and maybe afterwards, if questions comes, I'll try to deliberate. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. This is a very, very comprehensive analysis using data to analyze the situation of higher education in India. I'm going to do a little bit of change at the moment. I'm going to see whether we can invite my good friend Jay Gore from Purdue University to ask the questions in real time. Jay, are you online, and can you show up in your face?
I am online.
I like very much the question you asked, so I'm going to ask you to ask the question by yourself. We cannot see your face.
Yes, I am looking for the.
Well, anyway, ask questions anyway.
All right.
And then introduce yourself first. Introduce yourself first, quickly.
I'm Jay Gore. I'm Riley Professor at the School of Mechanical Engineering at Purdue University. I have had the opportunity to be inaugural Vice-Chancellor for an institute called Maharashtra Institute of Technology World Peace University in Pune.
Another famous MIT.
MIT WPU for the short form. And WPU part is important as per my thermodynamics teacher who founded the institution. And I learned first law and second law from Professor Karad, and have had a chance to visit back Pune 5 years in a row after spending a summer there. And MIT WPU is indeed a private institution that has changed the curriculum to continuous learning, continuous evolution of the syllabus, team teaching between teachers, insisting that teachers engage in research, as well as PhD level teachers only. And they have started collaborations with IIT Bombay, IISc, as well as Lehigh, Purdue, and other universities to receive research grants and contracts. And so the comment I made in the chat room was that such planned collaborations between IITs and IIScs with regional colleges would really allow very rapid progress. And IITs and IIScs could take this as a challenge, saying just as they have taken a challenge to recruit the elite students, they should take another challenge, which is how would we educate the masses to raise the innovation level, to raise the science and technology understanding of large populations by essentially adapting for collaboration purposes state and local universities. That was the thought I wanted to
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think I'm going to ask Subra, from your perspective, both as an Indian who grew up in India, studied at IIT Madras, and of course became very successful in the United States and now in Singapore, to say something about this issue.
I think, it's a very good question. I think the main issue is going to be the financial model. How do you sustain it? Digitization has given us an opportunity to reach a lot more, a much broader audience. But how do you make it financially sustainable for the long haul, especially for public institutions such as IITs, which have a specific mandate and a budget? How do you balance the requirements of what you are expected to do with the ambitions and the real possibilities of reaching out to a larger audience? And I think one opportunity coming out of COVID would be to tap into the digitization possibilities and use them in a way that we can develop interesting models that leverage both in terms of economies of scales, larger populations, but also tap into strengths of institutions of different kinds. So for example, IIT students could benefit from engaging in collaborations with students from smaller colleges in a particular region where the local needs may be different, maybe project-based learning where there are interactions. There are some of these things already go on, but on a much smaller scale. The question is, how do you scale it up? I think it's going to become it's mainly an issue of sustainable economics. If it can be done,
Right.
I think it'll really work.
Okay.
The other opportunity is some institutions have tried to do this with philanthropic support. And in India, there is if there is an opportunity to tap into engagement, for example, one eminent institution adopting one regional college, even a subset of a regional college, through some local philanthropic support, maybe a combination of local government and philanthropic support that could provide new opportunities.
Great. Bhaskar, do you have some comments about this question?
Yeah, I think, these kinds of things, IITs like institutions working with partner institutions, we also do it. We also now reach out tremendously to students from colleges. The IITs together run the world's largest, probably second largest, I don't know about the numbers in China, MOOCs-based education program. We are teaching about, we are co-teaching, the colleges are teaching them the main program, but we are teaching them quite a few courses. 1.5 million students register every semester. Wow. 250,000 take exams, which we conduct throughout the country. Wow. India is a very exam-driven country. We have this tremendous infrastructure for conducting exams, which are available for a fee. So we leverage that and we conduct exams and we give certificates, which have got a high degree of integrity. And these are not online exams. Students actually turn up in buildings and write the exams, and throughout the country. And now we are using the same, leveraging the same infrastructure. IIT Madras, we've launched an online BSc program in programming data science. Again, first just started last year. We have 10,000 students enrolled. So I think these are things we will do. So the digital mode for expansion will definitely play a big role, as I said. But this, if you do the numbers, if you pay attention to the numbers that were put out by co-panelists, I mean, India needs to do, everything has to be done at huge scale. And so we need a lot of institutions, brick and mortar institutions. We need all of them to go hybrid with online come physical. We need to we need foreign institutions to come into the country. except that I don't think a simple idea of, taking so many acres of land, putting up buildings in that model, spend $250 million, that's not going to go very far. A few of them may succeed simply because of the brand value, but that's not going to scale. What's going to scale are completely new ideas where you have, partnership models where, and some of I know that many of these universities in other countries are facing financial difficulties. So they may have to use this as an opportunity to solve some of their own problems and get a situation where it's mutually beneficial.
Very, very good. Let's start this conversation. As a physicist, I have always been impressed that in the beginning of the 20th century, with the development of quantum mechanics, as we all know, they were essentially dominated by European physicists or European scientists. Names like Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, Albert Einstein, Wolfgang Pauli, Max Born, and Dirac. By the way, I'm calling Dirac an Englishman, a European too, haha. And there were a few Asians such as Chandrasekhara Venkataraman, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1930. And of course, S.N. Bose of the Bose-Einstein condensation of today. Certainly, these are the Indian scientists that stand shoulder to shoulder with the European greats. As a joke, I was once given a proposal by the US funding agency to comment on a proposal on a scientist's work on Raman scattering. That's very common, except this guy spelled Raman, R-A-M-A-N, as R-A-M-E-N, which I instantly rejected it because I say anyone who cannot distinguish between great science and tasty noodles should not be funded. What is truly remarkable about these Indian giants is that they were educated entirely in India, and more amazingly, did their work in India. And not in the West. Granted, India at the time was under British rule. However, how much scientific successes of Bose and Raman and the likes could be attributed to the British colonial rule, if any? So there must be something about Indian higher education in particular, higher education in general, had or has done correctly. As the leaders of educators from India of today, both inside India and outside, such as Subra, perhaps this would be a great opportunity to engage in a dialogue about this. Who would like to start with this? Okay, well, Bimal, what about you?
Okay. Okay, so let me try to comment on this since you are talking about the basic sciences.
Well, it doesn't just have to be basic sciences.
No. So let me talk about the basic sciences.
Yeah.
Since we were very successful in basic sciences in earlier this 20th century, starting from J.C. Bose, then C.V. Raman, then S.N. Bose, M.N. Shah, and others. I think our Prime Minister Nehru decided that we should have this, we should invest more on basic science institutes. So he was in favor of creating very elite institutions where they could do research on basic sciences, forget about anything else. And that's why historically these institutes were created. So we do have still a lot of good institutions for science and mathematics in India who are doing, I would say, reasonably great work at the international level. Now, the question of getting a Nobel Prize or a prize like Abel Prize or Fields Medal, that's a different issue. One of my ex-colleague, no, that time I had a colleague, say from ISI, SRS Varadhan, he was a mathematician or a probabilist produced by ISI. He has gone and actually got the Abel Prize in mathematics. So the quality of education in basic science and mathematics that we created post-independence was I think, a visionary movement. And it was the line of what you thought that we were good in basic science and mathematics in earlier part of the century. But this did not grow the way it grew in the other countries like in China, is phenomenal. So I've been to China in 1990s, and another 5 years later, the way you grew is phenomenal. Even this, the growth in Europe and US, the growth is phenomenal. And we did not quite grow after the initial investment in 1947. Number of students remain the same. Even though I think the people are doing good work, it's not coming into that limelight. And on top of that, as I told you, more than half of them leave the country from these institutions who are getting researchers. So you will find great researchers in mathematics and Abhayankar in mathematics. So he was a Pune product, but then I think he was at Purdue. So he's one of the top mathematicians. So this is also, the migration is easy now, which was not so in the earlier part of the last century. And we did not invest much more in this region. So one of the things that I would like to do, government is probably not going to do that much. If private universities come up and they encourage this kind of basic research, and I think this will ultimately get a dividend. I don't know exactly how, but this could be useful for even industrial research. So something like a good biological research output could be an input to the pharma industry. I think we have to look this way now. So if we can relate our basic science research to this way, where it is going to go, then I think we'll get successful. And in that way, if we can focus that way, I think private institutions will be ready to invest in this education. Okay, let me stop here.
Very good. Subra, with your background as the director of NSF, how do you view this?
I think, you can look at, so you mentioned the history of science. If you go pre-Second World War, you find that Europe, especially 3 countries in Europe, Germany, France, and the UK, they produced a level of basic research in science that far surpassed the US. But after the Second World War, because of geopolitical factors, there was a major opportunity for the US to transform that landscape completely, which the US did very, very successfully.
That's right.
Underlying all of this, the very creation of the National Science Foundation, underlying all of this was creation of institutions that fostered this. So if you take the National Science Foundation as an example, since 1950, 275 American Nobel Prize winners have received some significant portion of their Nobel Prize winning research funded by NSF. There is no other agency in the world that has that kind of a track record in supporting basic science. And it's a relatively small agency in Washington. The annual budget is still about $10 billion. You compare that to NIH, you compare that to DOD, it's a very, very small.
Orders of magnitude difference.
Big difference. So I think what was the recipe behind this? If you look at NSF funding, one of the key factors I think that helped it was to create the infrastructure where you identify the best people and the best ideas, give them the freedom and the flexibility, and try to leave them alone. And without influence, it may not be perfect, but that is the aspiration and the goal. And it has set a gold standard for many institutions to follow. And I think that has been an important recipe. So the Vannevar Bush's famous book on science, The Endless Frontier, which led to the creation of the National Science Foundation, NIH, and NASA, was a visionary document in terms of the responsibilities for funding. Now, if you look at Singapore, in the 90s, there was a lot of discussion, and I was fortunate to be part of some of this discussion with the Singapore government. If you look at Singapore, just in a relatively short period of 20 years, a small country decided to invest a significant resources into building universities.
Right.
So that you can go from starting with basic research all the way to applied research. Now, if you look at the American example and also the Singapore example, they're very, very different. very different history, very different demographics, and very different size scale. If you look at the two of them, what you find is that consistent government support over a long period of time to launch and to build the foundations is going to be very, very critical for success until some kind of a steady state is reached. And I think that's one of the key ingredients of this. And you see the same thing now emerging in China at least over the last 15, 20 years, the consistent investments in a very large country. India has started to do that. I mean, Bhaskar knows the details very well. When I was a student at IIT Madras, there were very few PhD students. Today, PhD research is a very important part of what IIT does. And I think there's been a transformation in the last 20 to 30 years. And I think these kinds of things over a period of time, India's opening up started only in 1991 or so. So it's only about 30 years. It's not a long period of time, and it's a very large country. And I think consistent long-term focus will go a long way. The US and Singapore provide two examples of this.
Yeah, with that, that's a good segue into a question asked by a gentleman named Tech Lock. Tech Lock, are you online? Tech Lock? T-A-T-L-O-K.
Yes, it's me, Dashwan. Thank you very much. Can
you ask your question as you have stated in the chat room? And also, we like to see your face and introduce who you are.
Yes, my name is Lok Tat Singh. I was a former academic staff at Professor Suresh's university, a brilliant university at that. I hope you can hear me. My question, particularly on one question, was really about an alumni of the university, whether they're able to support scholarships, brilliant students to move forward. That's one of the questions. The other question that I had was really, I note that all the speakers graduated with a first degree from India, and the exposure in graduate programs overseas may have helped them to develop what it is today. And is that true?
Okay. Well, the question, your statement really says Dr. Ramamurthi's vision is extraordinary. So I'm going to ask Bhaskar to make comment first.
So I think the first question was whether alumni can support. I think they can. And in fact, of course, the IITs have probably been the most successful at this because IITs have a lot of alumni in the United States. And the United States is probably the one country which has a huge tradition of alumni supporting universities. It's not that common in many European countries, for example. And the other universities in India, there are many universities have very wealthy alumni, but traditionally alumni have supported, I mean, the philanthropy has not gone back to the universities. That may change, hopefully, but the IITs have been are being increasingly successful on that. The second question was with regard to the education. I think it is true that many Indians in the 60s, 70s, 80s went to UK and then US for education. Many meaning quite a few, and some of them who returned. You see them in some positions, but there are. I want to point out that there are enough and more very, very highly qualified and successful people who have been entirely educated in India, who also lead institutions in the country and who are doing things. So this is not a prerequisite, but yes, you do see that quite a bit. The exposure, of course, helps. That is why the NEP raises, puts a lot of emphasis on internationalization. We want foreign students in India, foreign teachers in India. We want Indian students and teachers to collaborate and visit and spend time at universities abroad, even if they don't go there to study or did not go there to study.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question that was sort of brought up in the discussion, and that is attracting international universities to India. An important strategy for India is to boost its higher education landscape by bringing in well-established international universities, not just in the West, including places like Singapore, for example. I include Nanyang Technological University and National University of Singapore in that list, to set up campuses in India. Now, it may sound easy, but it's actually very hard to do. I often said that if Silicon Valley did not have Stanford University, but have branch campuses of Princeton or Harvard or MIT, that may not do the same job as what Stanford had done. So what are the challenges for attracting top international universities to set up campuses in India? And what are the keys to make them successful in the sense of bringing not just the technological level of the students, but the intellectual level of the students as well in these branch campuses? Let me ask Subra to be the first one to make some comments about that.
I think, in the case of India, it's a very interesting story compared to many countries, that have tried to do this, that have done this. In the case of India, there is a long, and it also applies to China in a way. In both of these large countries, there's been a long tradition of scholarship that goes back thousands of years.
Right.
Literature, mathematics, architecture, and many other areas, from physics more than 100 years ago when C.V. Raman was doing his work in India and so forth. I think the talent pool is quite enormous. It's more of, and also the fact that graduates of places like IITs in Silicon Valley have done phenomenally well as CEOs and founders of large companies and leaders. So given all of this, in terms of human capacity, there is a lot of talent in India to do this. So the question is, what would it take to create an institution like IITs, which India created internally without, there was IIT Madras collaborated with Germany, and IIT Bombay collaborated with Russia and so forth. But nevertheless, these institutions were created in India. Right. I think personally, and the other three panelists have a lot more experience than I do within India today, but it seems to me that consistent long-term financial sustainability models will go a long way in establishing this. That is the rate limiting step in India. There are collaborations, there is talent pool, there is infrastructure, there are highly qualified people, and it's a large country of young people. And physical infrastructure as well as organizational infrastructure that is consistently supported across election cycles and so forth would go a very long way in creating this. And and India has the additional advantage over China in the sense English is the primary medium of instruction.
That's
so
right.
There is already a globally connected language that's available.
That's right. Suranjan, as a humanist, quote unquote, how do you view this? How do you view that foreign universities coming into India to enhance India's intellectual ambience?
See, let me make a distinction between international collaboration and internationalization of higher education. India always had international collaboration. Right. We had universities like Nalanda, Takshashila, which used to attract a number of foreign scholars and students. But the notion of internationalization of higher education came into being when, under the GATS regime, education came to be considered as a service sector. So I make a distinction between internationalization of education and international collaboration. Now, when we open the doors of higher education in a country like India to foreign universities, I have no problem. But there has to be certain laws and regulations to ensure that the competition between foreign universities and Indian universities should be compatible, and there should be equal platter in terms of competition. There cannot be a system where there are one set of rules for foreign universities and one set of rules for the Indian universities. And number two, we have also to ensure that top-class foreign universities come to India. I remember when I was a member of the University Grants Commission, when an earlier attempt was made to invite foreign universities, and a bill is still pending before the Indian Parliament called the Foreign University Regulators Bill. And I was a member of that particular committee. And when we found that none of the foreign universities, leading foreign universities were interested in coming to India. All universities, which in their home countries are at the lower level of the league table, were interested. I remember having participated in a panel discussion with the then Oxford University Vice-Chancellor, and he made a very pertinent comment. See, he said, education is not like McDonald's. You cannot franchise education. So I make a distinction between international collaboration. Of course, there should be international collaboration. There can be foreign campuses, but that those foreign universities and Indian universities should be allowed to compete on equal terms. Unless we do that, unfortunately, what the fear is, India might be once again in another form of colonialism. That should not happen.
Fantastic answer. Okay, we have an interesting question from a gentleman named Pratim Biswa. Are you online, Biswa, Pratim? Hello? If not, Pratim, are you online?
Yes, I am. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, can you show your face also?
Face, I think you all don't allow that. So I'll
Yeah, I
keep
don't
my
think-
handsome face to myself.
Okay, and also introduce yourself a little bit.
Great. I'm Pratim Biswas. I long back graduated from IIT Bombay.
Where are you?
I got
Where-
my PhD from Caltech, then taught for 20 years at Washington University in St. Louis, and just recently moved as Dean of Engineering to the University of Miami.
Okay, ask your question.
So my question was related more to advanced education. Again, the numbers in India are staggering, and I think staggering even for anyone in an educational sector, and that is a tremendous thing of importance to address. But I was looking, my question is more related to advanced education, where maybe you could have a more select group and you could deal with smaller numbers and emphasize the quality and impact that results due to that, or do it in a focused manner that the nation really needs to advance in. So in addition to collaborations with universities, my thought was, what about collaborations with leading research institutions? I'm not too familiar with the Indian scenario, but the CSIR labs come to mind often, and also industry. So the question is related more to the role of industry institutions, advanced education, at least in engineering, technology, science, play a role in advancing technological innovation. So could a partnership be created in that regard? And how does it compare to, in the United States, we have very high level collaborations with industrial sectors, even developing co-patents, all kinds of things, licensing technologies, and so forth. So my question was related to that: advanced education, role of industry, collaborations beyond universities.
Bhaskar, floor is yours.
I think once again the leading technical universities and the CSIR labs and DRDO and all these organizations do a lot of the technical heavy lifting for the government. Indian industry, we had a very highly licensed and controlled regime till 1991. Indian industry really were freed only from 1991 onwards. So we have been seeing in the last decade or more, much rapidly increasing partnerships with industry. Again, it starts with the leading institutions, but it's slowly trickling down. Our own experience at IIT Madras is our funding from industry and collaborations industry is growing at more than 20% a year compounded. So both in terms of value as well as in terms of the number of people who are involved. So I think it's not very different from elsewhere in the world, but it just tracks the maturing of Indian industry as well as the growth of the country. You know, a lot of the questions that were being asked actually, and Subra put it very rightly, it depends on getting viable financial models. And ultimately, the biggest solution for all of this is that the country grows, the economy grows bigger and bigger. So a lot of the stuff is going to answer itself from that first bullet in one of my slides, which is that India will grow to 10 trillion in about 10 years. So a lot of things will resolve themselves when there's more money around, because you need some amount of resources. Of course, you can always blow money, but you can also use it well. And you need resources to do a lot of the things that have been talked about. Thank you.
Well, I think we're approaching 90 minutes, so I'm going to have the last question. Tony Chen of KAUST, are you online? Are you still there? You have to unmute if you are. Tony? Well, if not, then I'll move to Eng Chai. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Could you ask a question?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm also quite interested in the Indian universities thinking of moving overseas as part of the new educational sort of policy. And what are your thoughts about this? Thank you.
Well, let's have Bhaskar.
Yeah, I think the government says you can do it. Many of us are thinking about it, but again, some of us, at least I feel that I've not had discussions on this with a lot of people, because the policy came last year and we've been pandemic bound since then. But it does look like it's too late. It's rather late in the day to adopt the usual model of getting into some place, 100 acres, building some buildings and starting. Looks like we have to do something different, if at all. So, and we'd have to have good reason for doing it. There was 3 years ago, there was a request from one country to come and set up a campus. That time we were not allowed to set up institutions abroad, expand campuses abroad. But we said we can partner, and we worked out a lot of details on how to get that done. It didn't happen for various reasons, but there's no reason why we can't do it. But there has to be, for us, there has to be a good financial reason for doing it, because if it's, the demand for education is so high in India that we don't have to look for providing it elsewhere unless there's a good financial reason for doing it, or the government of India wants us to do it because it wants to do that in some country for bilateral reasons. Otherwise, on our own, we probably will not go. If there's a good mutual benefit, financial, diversity-wise, research-wise, etc., we'll do it.
Great. Tony, are you still there? Let me try again. Okay. Bimal, you want to make a comment about this?
Okay, I think I have just one more comment, the last comment. In India, we are coining a term these days, translational research. So this is something I think we are going to focus on. So this is basically for the people in mathematics and basic science. Now see, it should not be perceived as an abstract concept. Can we translate this to some real industrial application? So we are trying to formulate this idea, concretize it. I've gone to the government. I think this is something where the private industry might be interested. So if we have institutions doing translational research in any subject, mathematics or physics or chemistry or biology, that is something we are looking into. And I'm hoping that in few years to come, industry will be interested in promoting such research, which will also enrich our institutions. Thank you.
Well, in one of our conversations in preparing for this webinar today, we discussed whether we should talk about the importance of private institutions in India. I think all of us agree that we should. So Bimal, I think you were one of those who said that really it's very important for us to talk about private institutions in India, even though all four of you are from public universities. Can you say something first?
No, that's what I'm telling. So I think the gap we are having, that I don't think government is not going to really invest too much on general education. I think their budgets are limited. We are growing. So if we have really educate the people, the citizens to an extent that we like to, there has to be a private entry. And why would private party will come here? That's why I coined that term translational research. So beside the education there, the people who would be involved in this university will also be involved in this kind of research, translational research. Then only private people will come. But I think it's necessary that private parties come into picture and get the numbers huge. And we need huge numbers, in a huge country, huge numbers. And the government is not capable of getting the numbers, to that huge level. So private party has to come.
Subra, in many of the Asian countries, private universities are struggling. How do you see India promoting private universities when the former universities of yours, Carnegie Mellon, which is a world-class private university, play such an important intellectual role in the whole country?
So I think the US has as many of us know, as a wonderful combination of public-private models. So you have land-grant universities, which started at the time of Abraham Lincoln in the 1860s during the Civil War, which were created to essentially influence the growth of the country in agriculture and engineering through public institutions. So Iowa State University, where I received my master's, is one of the very early land-grant universities. Cornell is also a land-grant university, even though it's an Ivy League private university.
Right.
I think in the US, the private university models evolved, especially in the late 1800s and 1900s, through private philanthropy. So Leland Stanford, through railroad, became very wealthy, and he created Stanford University. Andrew Carnegie, during the Second Industrial Revolution, became very wealthy through Carnegie Steel and many other things. And he helped create Carnegie Tech. Andrew Mellon, through banking, founded Mellon Institute, which merged with Carnegie Tech to form Carnegie Mellon. University of Chicago, Rockefeller University. So there are example after example of this, where private philanthropy created private institutions, which became world-class. And I think that combination of public-private is very good, because somebody who's a first-time university goer can go to a community college, get a 2-year diploma, and then go from there to a land-grant university to get an undergraduate degree, and then go to a private university if they wish. So there is this model of moving up, and this has created a dynamic in the US, which has served the country very well, both economically and intellectually. And I think, given the size of India, given the large industry, especially in the last 30 years, and India's dominant role in areas such as digitization, it is not inconceivable that such a model can be developed in a place like India very successfully. Government supporting public institutions such as IITs, private institutions. There are private institutions in India that have emerged even in the last 10, 15 years. If they become institutions of quality, such as the private institutions in the US over a period of time, then I think there is an opportunity. In principle, I don't see why it cannot be done, but it has to be done in a sustained way over a long period of time. And the private universities, as you know well, in the US, have built up an endowment that can sustain them, especially the most successful ones. And that takes time. That takes time and a lot of dedicated work, because the US government is not going to support. At least all the private universities I've been involved in did not get any support from either the state government or the federal government, other than research funding.
Suranjan?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to have my comments in two ways. One, entry of private capital in higher education is a reality. If we have to increase the GER to the extent that the government of India wants, only public universities won't be able to do. And in that sense, we need to involve the private entrepreneurs, private capital in higher education. But I would like to make a distinction between private participation in higher education and commercialization of higher education. If we have private participation in health, transport, why not in education? But education being a process in which we call the social capital, we need to ensure that equity and access is also inbuilt in the private institutions. The tradition that Subra mentioned in the case of America, unfortunately, is not yet present in India. The fine mixture between private and public is the ideal. We can hardly count upon some private institutions in India growing out of philanthropy. So if we have the American model, yes, we need to go in for it. But as I said, private institutions have to come in a big way in the realm of higher education. But we need to ensure, I make a distinction, a qualitative distinction between private entry into higher education and commercialization of higher education. We should be very, very careful about that.
Bhaskar?
Yeah, I think, equity is an issue, very important issue. But it does look to me that a lot of people in India who can afford to pay, if not for all their education, part of it, are also getting free education, as I did when I joined IIT, because the government has no way of knowing who needs it and who doesn't. And they just, whatever little money they have, they just give it to whoever they deserve in some fashion, some merit-based thing, and then it doesn't go the distance it should. I think we have to evolve a way by which the public spending on education is focused on equity, and private investment comes in to take care of as much of education that people can afford to invest in themselves. So both are required. Targeted investment by the government has been successful wherever they've been able to target. It's not easy to target, but that I think is the way to go. And scholarships have always been important, even in the US, and that's going to be important in India too, for equity. But as the economy grows, a lot more people can pay for education, and they do in schools today. Voluntarily, a lot of families put their kids in private schools, which are more expensive because they perceive them as being better, even though they have the option of sending their kids to a free government school. A lot of poorer people do that. So the point is, we need to find a way by which limited public resources are targeted at equity, and maybe to some extent in some elite institutions from a national perspective. But otherwise, spreading it too thin just means it doesn't go very far.
That's right. Well, as they say, time flies when you're having fun. We're past 90 minutes so rapidly. By the way, I got one complaint, whom I will not say who that is, but the complaint is, why is it that all the panelists are male and there are no female? And my, I don't have an answer to that question, but just somehow there aren't that many female presidents or female leaders in higher education. And someone brought up the issue of gender inequality earlier. I think that's probably an important issue in India higher education, or India education in general. This is, by the way, true also, the fact that last year was the third female Nobel laureates in physics. 100 more years of physics Nobel laureates, only 3 of them. And you can see that the gender issue is always a subliminal issue that built into education that perhaps we should think about. We didn't discuss anything today about that, although someone mentioned it. But I think in general, India having at least 50% of its population of 1.3 billion being female, that's not represented is a question that we all have to worry about. But anyway, I think that we have touched upon an enormous amount of issues facing India higher education. In fact, India in general, because higher education is the pulse of the nation. When the higher education is weak, so is the nation. So I think the fact that its higher education is so important for India as being one of the most powerful and largest country in the world, not only in Asia, how important it should be. And I think we touched upon a lot of issues today. And I hope this conversation will continue. And perhaps sometime down the road, we should have other DAUs to come back and discuss with India and how India interact with other countries. By the way, someone mentioned China several times today, and not me. So I deliberately didn't want to mention China, but China was sort of brought up. Perhaps in one of these future DAUs, we can have the Chinese higher education leaders and the Indian higher education leaders, such as yourself, to have a even more interesting conversation or dialogue about higher education for the world. And India and China together is 46% of humanity. So again, let me take this opportunity to thank my friends Tony and Eng Chai and of course Max, who organized this, and of course Kaus for giving us the technology to do this. Again, thanking the four panelists. These are all outstanding people. You can tell from the way they speak. They are telling you far less than they know because of the time constraint. If we allow each of them 3 hours, they'll probably go nonstop at it. So anyway, thank you very much, and good evening or good morning.